The North Atlantic, the sea stretched in every direction, cold and endless, swallowing the horizon beneath a heavy sheet of gray clouds. The men aboard the U.S. Navy destroyer, USS Valiant, had grown used to the rhythm of escort duty. Their job was simple, at least on paper: protect the merchant convoy carrying food, ammunition, and supplies bound for Britain. But in truth, nothing about this ocean was simple. Every shadow, every whisper of sonar, every flicker of motion across the waves could mean death. They were fighting two enemies here: the Nazi U-boats lurking below the surface, and the ocean itself, which seemed determined to break men down until their nerves frayed like old rope. The Atlantic was vast and merciless, and every sailor on board had begun to feel that they weren't sailing on it, but through something alive, something watching. The fog rolled in thick that morning, a wall of damp white that clung to the ship's steel skin and muffled every sound. It wasn't unusual, but it always set men on edge. "Fog makes the wolves bolder," one petty officer muttered, meaning the German submarines. But in truth, it wasn't just the possibility of U-boats that unsettled them. The fog swallowed perspective. It erased the horizon. Out there beyond visibility, the ocean could hold anything. "Sonar technician?" Third-class Hayes pressed his headphones tighter against his ears. The screen pulsed, green blips marking out the convoy ships ahead and behind. But there was something else, a faint return, too big, too irregular. At first he thought it might be interference, maybe the echo of the convoy itself bouncing strangely in the fog, but the shape repeated. It wasn't static, it was moving. "Contact, bearing 15 degrees, Hayes said into his headset. His voice trembled despite his attempt at calm. "Large contact. Repeat, large." The officer of the watch frowned. "Submarine?" Hayes hesitated. He'd been trained to recognize U-boats by sound and movement. This wasn't one. The shape was massive. "Negative, sir. It's too big. It's not moving like one either." The watch officer gave him a hard look but relayed the information to the bridge. Moments later, the captain himself appeared, his rain-slick coat already damp from the fog. He leaned over the sonar display, eyes narrowing at the pulsing signal. "Could be a school of whales," the captain muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. "Or icebergs throwing back echoes." The sailors weren't reassured. Whales were rare this far north, and no iceberg moved like that. The men knew it. Hayes knew it. Later on deck, a young seaman named McCarthy stood watch with binoculars pressed to his face, though the fog made them nearly useless. He swore he saw something just below the surface, a dark shadow gliding silently beneath the waves, longer than the destroyer itself. When he blinked, it was gone. He lowered the binoculars, his hands shaking. "Everything all right, son?" the chief petty officer asked, noticing his pale face. McCarthy swallowed. I thought I saw something. Something big." The chief gave him a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Out here, you'll see all kinds of things. Don't let the sea get in your head." But later, when he thought no one was looking, the chief scanned the waters himself, uneasy. As the hours dragged on, the fog thickened, wrapping the convoy like a shroud. The ship's engines rumbled steadily, but every groan of the steel hull, every splash against the bow felt amplified in the silence. Men smoked nervously on deck, muttering about omens and bad luck. One swore he could smell something metallic in the air, like rust or blood carried on the breeze. At dinner in the mess hall, the talk turned restless. "Mark my words," an older sailor muttered between mouthfuls. "This ain't no U-boat we're chasing. The ocean's got things in it older than the war, older than man, and we're in their waters now." Some laughed, though uneasily. Superstition was common at sea. But even the men who mocked the idea kept glancing at the walls, as if expecting something to slam against the steel at any second. By nightfall, the ship was running blacked out, no lights to give away its position to enemy subs. The fog swallowed the convoy until even the nearest cargo vessel was just a vague silhouette. Only the steady ping of sonar kept them connected, a heartbeat in the deep that reminded them of their place in a vast, hostile world. Hayes was back at his station, eyes red from staring at the glowing green screen. The contact was still there, bigger now, closer. He could feel sweat prickling down his neck, He wanted to call it in again, but after being brushed off earlier, he hesitated. What if it was just noise? What if he was wrong? Then, faint but undeniable, the contact shifted. A deliberate movement, circling beneath the convoy like a predator testing its prey. Hayes' stomach dropped. This wasn't an iceberg. It wasn't a whale, and it wasn't going away. He lifted the headset, voice hoarse. "Captain, you need to see this again. It's back. And sir," he paused, staring at the monstrous shape sliding across the sonar. "Sir, it's bigger than anything I've ever seen." Above, on deck, the ocean was unnervingly calm, waves smoothed flat as glass. The fog pressed in so tight it felt like the ship was drifting through another world entirely, cut off from everything familiar. And somewhere in that silence, something enormous moved unseen, keeping pace, waiting for the right moment to rise. The men of the USS Valiant believed they were hunting U-boats. They hadn't yet realized the truth. It was hunting them. The night deepened, the fog growing so thick it was as if the ship was steaming through a dream or a nightmare. The convoy crawled forward, engines muffled, sailors straining their ears for the faintest sound of danger. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest, that made your heartbeat feel too loud like even the sea could hear it. On the bridge of the USS Valiant, the captain studied the sonar reports. Hayes had delivered. For hours that strange contact had shadowed them. Too big, too deliberate. The captain was a man hardened by years at sea, not given to panic, but the unease in his eyes was impossible to miss. He gave the order, double the lookouts. Every man was to be alert. McCarthy, the young seaman on deck, stood rigid at his post, peering into the fog until his eyes ached. His nerves were stretched thin after what he thought he'd seen earlier. That vast shadow gliding below the surface. Now every ripple looked like a fin. Every swell of water seemed to hide something beneath. Then it came. A sound, deep and unnatural, rolled through the hull. It wasn't the groan of steel, nor the crash of waves. It was lower, organic, almost like the bellow of some colossal beast, echoing through the deep. The sailors froze, glancing at each other, faces pale. "What the hell was that?" McCarthy whispered. From the sonar room, Hayes' voice crackled over the comms. "Contact moving fast, starboard side. It's rising." The men rushed to the rails, peering into the fog. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the shifting mist and the faint glimmer of waves. Then the water erupted. Something vast broke the surface with terrifying force. At first, the sailors thought it was a submarine breaching. But no submarine looked like this. A massive, scaled body, slick and black, glistened under the pale moonlight. Water cascaded down its ridged back as it rose higher, impossibly high, until it towered over the destroyer. A serpent. That was the only word that made sense. Its body coiled like living steel cables, thicker than any mast, and its head, God help them, its head loomed above the deck, eyes glowing faintly in the fog like embers. "Open fire!" the captain roared. The ship erupted into chaos. The deck guns roared, tracer rounds lancing through the mist. Machine guns rattled, sparks flying as shells exploded against the creature's hide. The Serpent let out a sound that was both a scream and a roar, so loud it shook the steel beneath their feet. Men clamped their hands over their ears as the sound reverberated in their bones. The beast lashed out, its massive body slamming against the hull. With the force of a tidal wave, the destroyer shuddered, nearly capsizing, men thrown to the deck like ragdolls. Water surged over the railings, sweeping one sailor screaming into the sea before anyone could grab him. McCarthy fired his rifle wildly, the bullets pinging uselessly off the creature's armored scales. The Serpent's head darted down with horrifying speed, jaws snapping inches from where he stood. He stumbled back, the stench of brine and decay filling his lungs, his ears ringing with the crack of teeth slamming shut. The guns kept hammering, sparks dancing across the Serpent's hide. Finally, one shell struck near its eye, and the creature recoiled, thrashing violently. The water around the ship churned into froth as its body writhed, smashing against the waves. The destroyer rocked so hard it seemed sure to capsize, men clinging to whatever they could grasp. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Serpent vanished. With a final hiss, it slipped beneath the waves, leaving only a boiling wake behind. The sea fell eerily silent again, save for the groans of the battered ship. No one spoke for a long moment. The men just stood there, dripping wet, weapons trembling in their hands, staring at the place where the monster had disappeared. Finally, McCarthy whispered, "What in God's name was that?" No one answered, not because they didn't want to, but because no one knew. Down in the sonar room, Hayes stared at the screen. The contact was still there, bigger than before, stronger, and it wasn't retreating, it was circling. The captain wiped the seawater from his face and steadied himself. His jaw set. "That thing's not gone, it's just testing us." And deep in the Atlantic, the Serpent moved unseen, patient and relentless. The first attack had been only a warning. The true battle was yet to come. The sea was restless. The fog swirled thicker than before, curling low over the black waves like smoke over a battlefield. Every man aboard the USS Valiant felt it, the tension, the weight of something watching them from below. The first strike had been brutal, but the silence that followed was far worse. It was the silence of a predator that hadn't finished hunting. McCarthy stood at the rail, knuckles white as he gripped the cold steel. His clothes were still soaked from the spray of the Serpent's first assault. His rifle trembled in his hands, not from the chill but from the raw fear that refused to leave his bones. Below deck, Hayes stared at the sonar screen. The green lines swept again and again across the display, each pass confirming what his gut already knew. The contact wasn't gone. It was larger now, its presence unmistakable. It moved slowly, deliberately, circling the convoy like a wolf sizing up a wounded deer. "It's stalking us," Hayes muttered. His voice cracked in the radio room, where men leaned in to hear. Up on the bridge, the captain listened to the reports, his face grim in the dim red light. "Get the depth charges ready," he barked. "If it wants to circle us, we'll show it what's waiting down here." But the Serpent struck first. Without warning, the sea beneath the destroyer erupted. The water surged upward, lifting the ship like a toy. Men screamed as they were thrown to the deck, equipment sliding across the floor. Then, from the darkness below, the Serpent's head shot upward, massive jaws snapping shut on the forward gun mount. Metal shrieked as the beast ripped it free, tossing the twisted wreckage into the sea like scrap wood. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring. McCarthy fired desperately, bullets sparking harmlessly off the Serpent's armored sails. The air filled with the stench of salt and rot, the Serpent's hiss splitting the night like tearing thunder. "Depth charges, now," the captain roared. Explosions thundered beneath the waves, massive plumes of water erupting around the ship. For a moment, the men dared to hope, but then the Serpent retaliated. Its colossal body slammed against the destroyer's hull with a force so great that rivets burst and steel plates bent inward. The vessel groaned like a dying animal. McCarthy scrambled to his feet just as the Serpent's tail smashed across the deck, sweeping men aside like rag dolls. Blood streaked the steel, their cries drowned out by the shrieking of twisting metal. One sailor was hurled against the railing and overboard, vanishing into the frothing Black Sea before anyone could reach him. From the sonar room, Hayes' panicked voice broke through the chaos. "It's not alone. I repeat, it's not alone." The words froze the crew's blood. The screen showed not one contact, but two. Another massive shape lurked just beyond the first, moving in tandem. The captain's eyes widened. "God help us." The second Serpent rose from the fog like a nightmare. Its body, even larger than the first, slithered across the water's surface. Its head loomed, eyes glowing faintly like pale fire. The men watched in horror as it let out a guttural bellow, the sound reverberating through the steel of their ship, shaking their bones. Twin monsters, ancient and colossal, now encircled the destroyer. "Keep firing," the captain ordered. "We hold the line." The ship became a blazing fortress in the night. Guns spat fire and tracers, depth charges boomed. Flames flared across the Serpent's slick hides. For a moment, the ocean became a battlefield from another world. Man against legends thought long dead, but the Serpents were relentless. One smashed its body across the stern, nearly tearing the propellers free. The other coiled around the bow, squeezing with monstrous strength. The steel plates groaned, bending inward. Men stumbled, choking on smoke and seawater as waves crashed over the deck. McCarthy ducked behind a bulkhead, clutching his rifle like a child holding a toy. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He caught sight of the Serpent's eyes glowing through the fog. Huge, intelligent, and merciless. They weren't just animals. These things were hunters, ancient predators from a time before man had ships, before man had fire, and they were hungry. The captain staggered back to his feet, gripping the railing as the ship tilted. All hands, brace for impact. The larger Serpent dove beneath the destroyer. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then it struck from below. The ship heaved upward, its bow rising clear of the water. Men screamed, thrown across the deck as the vessel teetered on the edge of capsizing. The beast's massive body surged past in the dark, scales glinting faintly like obsidian armor. The Valiant came crashing back down with a shattering impact, waves exploding outward. The hull split, compartments flooding instantly. Sirens blared, lights flickered. The ship was dying, but even in the chaos, the men refused to surrender. Gun crews kept firing, tracers ripping across the Serpent's body. One lucky shell struck near the beast's eye, and it recoiled, shrieking so loud the air vibrated. Blood, dark and thick, sprayed across the deck. For the first time, the men saw the monster bleed. Cheers rose, desperate and ragged, but they were cut short as the second Serpent surged forward, jaws snapping around the deck's aft tower. With terrifying strength, it tore it free, hurling the twisted wreckage into the sea. The ship groaned, lights failing. McCarthy lay on the deck, his body shaking. Above him, through the choking smoke, he saw the shadow of the Serpent's head hovering just beyond the fog. Its breath rolled across him like a foul wind. Its jaws parted slowly, rows of dagger teeth glinting faintly. In that moment, he understood. This was no random attack, no accident. These things weren't just defending territory. They were destroying deliberately, testing, as if the ship, the men, the guns, they were nothing but prey. The Serpents had returned to claim the sea, and the Valiant was only their first victim. The USS Valiant drifted half-broken in the gray waters. Smoke still poured from its torn midsection, trailing across the surface like the last breath of a dying beast. Inside, the ship was chaos. Fires burned unchecked, compartments flooded, men staggered through corridors filled with smoke and seawater. The destroyer was alive only through stubborn will. But worse than the ruin was the silence. The two Serpents had vanished, slipping beneath the waves after their brutal assault. For the moment, the sea seemed calm, but every man aboard knew it was the kind of calm that came before a predator struck again. McCarthy sat in the ruined gun bay, staring at the blood-stained deck. Some of it was human, some of it wasn't. Dark, thick, and oily, it clung to the steel in sluggish rivers. The smell was unforgettable, metallic, but with something deeper, older, like wet stone and rotting earth. He couldn't shake the image of the Serpent's wounded eye, its gaze filled not with pain but with fury. Hayes staggered into the bay, clutching a folder of crumpled maps and papers. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "You need to see this," he rasped. McCarthy blinked. "What is it?" Hayes shoved the maps down, pointing at hand-drawn notes scrawled in the margins. Symbols, spirals, jagged lines, serpent shapes traced in thick ink. "I found these in the captain's quarters," he said, voice low. "They aren't Navy charts. They're older, copies of something he shouldn't have had." McCarthy frowned, glancing at the pages. The drawings looked wrong, like something carved into stone long before ships existed. Around the serpent symbols were words in faded Latin: Oceanus dormit, monstrum vigilat. The ocean sleeps. The monster watches, Hayes whispered, as if repeating the phrase cursed him. Before McCarthy could respond, the bulkhead groaned, and the captain appeared. His uniform was shredded, face streaked with blood and smoke, but his eyes burned with grim determination. "Those charts aren't for you," he said sharply. Hayes straightened, anger in his trembling voice. "Captain, you knew this thing was real. You brought us here." The captain's jaw tightened. He looked between them, then finally sighed, the fight leaving his shoulders. "There are stories," he said, voice low, almost lost to the groan of the ship. Old sailors' tales, monsters beneath the waves, older than nations. The Navy dismissed them as superstition. But intelligence reports, ships vanishing without explanation, sonar echoes that didn't match any whale or sub. He trailed off, glancing at the map again. I pulled what records I could. They all pointed here to this stretch of sea. I didn't tell command. If I had, they'd have laughed me out of uniform. McCarthy felt his blood run cold. So you brought us here blind? The captain's gaze hardened. We were already blind. Better to see the truth than stumble into it unprepared. A loud creak shuddered through the hull. Water seeped in through cracks in the steel. Somewhere below, pumps roared in a desperate struggle to keep the ship afloat. Hayes shook his head. This isn't just an animal, it's something else. Something ancient. Maybe even worshipped. He tapped the strange spirals on the paper. These are ritual markings. I've seen them in old anthropology texts, the Cherokee, the Norse, even sailors out of Polynesia. They all spoke of a serpent below the world. Different names, same thing. McCarthy swallowed hard. The World Serpent. Hayes nodded. Yermungander, Leviathan, Yuktena. Every culture gave it a face. Every culture feared it. The captain said nothing. He only stared out the shattered porthole at the endless gray horizon where the fog was thickening again. Suddenly the sonar screamed. Hayes spun, rushing back toward the radio room. The green screen pulsed violently. One massive contact moved beneath them, then another, then another. 3, Hayes whispered. 3 separate signatures. The blood drained from his face. There's more than 2. A deep vibration rattled through the steel. Plates shuddered. Tools clanged against the floor. The men froze. Beneath them, something vast shifted. The water bulged as if the sea itself was breathing. McCarthy's chest tightened. They're calling each other. The captain's hand clenched the railing until his knuckles turned white. No, he muttered. They're gathering. All across the ship, men whispered in fear. Some prayed. Some loaded their weapons with trembling hands. A few stared into the water as if mesmerized, their eyes wide and glassy. Then, through the fog, faint shapes appeared. Not serpents' ruins. Jagged stones, massive and ancient, rose out of the sea in a circle barely visible through the mist. Pillars half submerged, carved with markings that matched the symbols on the captain's stolen charts. A drowned temple, or something older still. The captain's face went pale. God help us. The sonar screamed again, louder, as the shapes below converged. The serpents weren't hunting anymore. They were guarding, defending, protecting something beneath the ruins. McCarthy gripped his rifle, breath shallow. In that moment, the war above the water, the convoys, the submarines, the battles felt meaningless. The true war, the one no history book would ever tell, was happening here. And humanity was losing. The USS Valiant was barely afloat. Fires raged, uncontrolled in her belly. Black smoke curling skyward before being swallowed by the endless fog. Hull plates screamed with every swell, pumps wheezed, choking on seawater that gushed through ruptures deep below. Yet somehow, against all odds, she lived, if only because the men aboard refused to let her die. But the ocean had other plans. The sonar operator wiped sweat from his brow, eyes glued to the green glow of the scope. Contacts. 3, no, 4, circling us. His voice trembled. Too big for subs. Way too big. The captain stood silent for a long moment, jaw tight. The weight of command pressed heavier than any serpent coil. Then he turned to the men gathered around him. The XO, McCarthy, Hayes, and what was left of his senior officers. This is it, the captain said flatly. We can't outrun them. We can't call for help. If we do nothing, we'll be picked apart one by one. Our only chance is to hit them first, hard. Hayes shook his head, voice cracking. Captain, you don't understand. These things aren't just animals. They're guardians. Protectors of whatever that, he pointed out at the half-submerged ruins looming through the fog. That place is. If we attack, we're not just fighting beasts, we're waging war against something sacred. The captain's eyes narrowed. Sacred or not, it wants us dead, and I won't hand over my men without a fight. McCarthy felt the fire in the captain's words, but deep inside, dread gnawed at him. This wasn't just war, this was sacrilege. Alarms blared. A coil of shadow rose from the water on the starboard side, massive and silent, its scales glistening with oil-black sheen. Another surfaced aft, body arcing high, blocking what little horizon remained. The men froze, staring at impossible shapes that seemed carved from the ocean itself. Then the captain roared, "Stations! All guns on target! Torpedo crews! Stand ready!" The deck erupted into motion. Gunners swung barrels skyward. Ammunition was hauled and slammed into breaches. Depth charge crews armed the last of their explosives with shaking hands. The ship moaned under their frenzy, but it was alive with desperate defiance. McCarthy manned his gun, knuckles white on the handles. The Serpent's eye broke the surface. A pale orb slit with black glass and fixed on them with terrible intelligence. He felt it in his bones. It was not just looking, it was judging. Fire! The Valiant's guns thundered. Shells ripped into the Serpent's flank, bursting across its armored hide in fountains of spray and shards. The pom-poms rattled, tracers stitching lines of fire across its glistening skin. The beast recoiled, water exploding as it thrashed, then roared, not a sound of voice, but a vibration so deep the sea itself shook. Before the men could breathe, another Serpent struck from port, slamming its body against the hull. The destroyer lurched sideways, men thrown across the deck. Steel shrieked, rivets popped like gunshots. "Torpedoes fire," the captain barked. The forward tubes spat their deadly cargo. White wakes tore across the sea, slamming into the Serpent's midsection. A muffled boom rolled through the water. The beast convulsed, blood dark as tar spilling into the waves. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Then the others rose. 3 Serpents encircled them now, their bodies weaving like walls of flesh and scale. Their heads broke the surface in unison, massive jaws dripping seawater. Mouths lined with jagged bone ridges, built to tear steel like paper. The men faltered. Some fired blindly, others froze in terror. Hayes whispered a prayer. McCarthy gripped his weapon and screamed, emptying every round he had into the nearest maw. One Serpent struck, jaws snapping a section of railing clean off, men vanishing with it. Another coiled around the stern, squeezing until the hull bent and buckled with a sound like a church organ played by the sea itself. Pipes burst, steam scalded, and the deck pitched. "Depth charges," the captain shouted. The charges rolled off the stern, sinking into the black. A moment later, the ocean erupted. Pillars of water rising, serpents thrashing. For a brief instant, chaos reigned. One beast released its grip, wounded, thrashing violently as dark blood frothed through the sea. But the reprieve was short. The largest serpent reared above them, its body rising higher than the mast, casting the ship in shadow. Its mouth opened wide, revealing not rows of teeth but ridges of jagged bone like shattered stone. It came down with earth-shattering force, slamming the bow and tearing the forward gun clean from its mount. Men screamed. The ship groaned. The Valiant was breaking. The captain steadied himself on the bridge rail, voice hoarse but unyielding. "If we can't kill it, we'll cripple it. We ram." McCarthy turned, stunned. "Sir, the ship won't survive." "We're dead anyway," the captain snapped. "Better to take a piece of hell with us." The helmsman looked back, pale, trembling, but nodded. He spun the wheel. The Valiant shuddered. Engines roaring one last defiant song. The bow cut through waves, aiming straight for the Serpent's wounded flank. Guns blazed. Men screamed. The beast turned too slow, massive bulk sluggish from blood loss. Impact. Steel met flesh. The bow crumpled, the ship groaning in agony as it rammed into the monster's side. Plates split, old scars tore open. Dark blood erupted, showering the deck in foul rain. The Serpent writhed, the sea boiling with its rage. The captain stood firm, eyes blazing. "Prepare all charges. If we go down, we take it with us." Men scrambled, dragging the last of the depth charges, priming them with shaking hands. McCarthy grabbed one himself, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. None of them were leaving. Above, the Serpent screamed, not in sound, but in a vibration that rattled their bones and made the sea itself tremble. The captain raised his hand. His voice cut through the chaos, a final order. "Detonate!" The deck of the Valiant was chaos, a storm of men, steel, and fury. Flames leapt from broken fuel lines, painting the fog in shades of orange against the gray sky. Every breath reeked of smoke, oil, and blood. The ship was no longer a vessel of war. It was a floating graveyard held together by defiance alone. McCarthy staggered to his feet, ears ringing from the last impact. All around him, men were running, hauling charges, dragging the wounded, screaming orders no one could hear above the cacophony. The Serpent coiled tighter around the stern, scales grinding against steel, the sound like 1,000 knives drawn across a coffin lid. The captain stood tall at the bridge, coat torn, face smeared with soot and salt, eyes burning with a fire McCarthy had never seen before. He pointed toward the charges. "Arm every last one." His voice carried like a thunderclap across the ruin. The men obeyed without hesitation. Depth charges were dragged across the deck, pins yanked, timers spun. They were no longer weapons, they were offerings. Each charge a prayer, each spark of fire a vow. If they were to be taken, then so too would the beast that haunted them. The serpents circled, their pale eyes watching, calculating. The wounded one thrashed wildly, staining the sea black with blood, its death screams sending waves across the wrecked hull. But the largest remained, towering above, its gaze fixed on the captain, as though it understood exactly what he intended. Hayes, his face pale and streaked with tears, clutched the arm of McCarthy. "Don't you see? We're not killing them. We're breaking some ancient law. This is a curse. When we light those fuses, we damn ourselves." McCarthy shoved him back, eyes wild. "We're damned already, Hayes. Better to die fighting than screaming in their coils." The first charges were rolled overboard, sinking into the dark with hollow splashes. The men waited, breath held, until the sea erupted. Columns of white water roaring skyward, serpents writhing in pain. One was torn open along its flank, black ichor spilling in streams. The men cheered, voices raw with desperation. But the cheers died as the largest serpent rose higher, blotting out the sky. It loomed above the bridge, jaws opening to reveal that cavernous maw of bone and darkness. Its roar was not sound but pressure, shaking teeth loose in their skulls, making their vision blur. Windows shattered, rivets popped, men dropped to their knees, bleeding from ears and noses. And still the captain stood unshaken. "More charges," he bellowed. His voice was the last anchor holding them together. "Get them ready, every damn one." McCarthy joined the frenzy, hauling a charge toward the rail. His arms burned, lungs screamed, but he forced himself forward. Men worked like demons, dragging the last of the ship's arsenal into place. They were no longer sailors. They were executioners at the edge of the abyss. The Serpent lunged. Its body crashed down across the bow, crushing guns, tearing steel, hurling men like dolls into the churning sea. McCarthy barely clung to the railing as waves flooded the deck. The ship groaned, buckling under the pressure. But still the charges rolled into the deep. The captain raised his hand, a single motion that cut through the chaos. Now, the order passed like lightning. Men dove for the detonators, hands trembling as they pressed the switches. The sea erupted. A dozen explosions ripped through the depths, one after another, like the heart of the ocean itself was tearing apart. Towers of water engulfed the ship. The Serpent writhed, its coils thrashing wildly, scales tearing as shockwaves battered its body. Blood poured in rivers, staining the sea blacker than night. The Valiant groaned, the stern lifted from the water, split nearly in two by the Serpent's grip and the blasts beneath. Men screamed, tumbling into the abyss. Flames met seawater, steam engulfing everything. McCarthy clung to a rail, vision swimming. He saw the beast's head rise one last time, eyes blazing with fury and something else, recognition. As though it knew this was not victory, but sacrifice. Then its head collapsed into the sea with a final thunderous crash, sending waves that swallowed what remained of the deck. The captain was still on the bridge, unflinching even as the waters consumed him. His final words carried across the chaos, etched into the men's bones. "Hold fast, boys, we end it here." The world dissolved into fire and water. For an endless moment, there was nothing but the roar of the ocean, the groan of steel and the thunder of explosions rolling through the abyss. Then silence. When McCarthy opened his eyes, he was floating in a sea-stained black, debris bobbing all around. The Valiant was gone. The men were gone. Only the endless fog remained, and the faint shadow of something massive, sinking slowly into the depths. He treaded water, gasping, his mind torn between relief and horror. Had they won? Had they damned themselves? He could not tell. All he knew was that he was alive for now. But in the distance, far across the fog, came another sound. A low, rolling bellow. Deeper, louder. Not one beast, not three, but many. McCarthy closed his eyes, knowing the sacrifice had not ended the curse. It had only awakened it. The ocean was quiet now, too quiet. McCarthy floated among the wreckage, clinging to a splintered beam of the Valiant. The world was ash and fog, silence broken only by the groan of waves slapping against ruined steel. His ears still rang from the detonations. His lungs burned with every breath, and the salt stung deep into cuts across his body. But worse than the pain was the silence. The Valiant, proud warship of the U.S. Navy, was gone. Hundreds of men had vanished beneath the waves in the blink of an eye, their screams cut short by the abyss. The ocean had swallowed them whole, and in its place was only the faint tang of blood and oil drifting across the current. McCarthy lifted his head, staring into the fog. It pressed in from every direction, suffocating, endless. He half expected the captain's voice to still cut through, to bark an order, to remind them they were sailors of the Navy and not corpses waiting for the sea. But the bridge was gone, the captain was gone, and McCarthy was alone. Or so he thought. Shapes bobbed in the water, men clinging to debris, eyes wide with terror. Survivors. Hayes was one of them, his face pale as bone, lips moving in prayer. "We shouldn't have done it," he whispered, words broken by coughs. "We weren't supposed to fight them. That wasn't a monster. It was something older, something sacred." McCarthy wanted to shout at him, to tell him to shut up, to save his strength. But the words died in his throat as he glanced into the water. Beneath the surface, the black stain of blood was spreading, clouds of ichor stretching like ink. And deeper still, vast shadows rolled, massive shapes, moving with impossible grace. Not one, not two, dozens, maybe hundreds, each as large as the serpent they had faced. Some larger. Hayes saw them too. His prayer turned into a sob. "They'll come for us. They'll never stop." We woke the whole brood. McCarthy clutched the beam tighter, bile rising in his throat. He remembered the captain's final words. "We end it here." But they hadn't ended anything. They had only pulled back the veil. Hours dragged by, or maybe minutes. Time no longer held meaning. Survivors clung to what little wreckage they could, their bodies racked with shivers as the cold gnawed at their bones. The fog never lifted. No rescue planes came. No ships arrived. Just the rolling shadow of something vast circling them, unseen but felt, like the weight of a predator's gaze. Some men lost their grip and slipped quietly into the sea, their screams muffled as the waves closed over their heads. Others simply stopped fighting, their eyes vacant, their lips whispering to gods no longer listening. McCarthy fought to stay awake, forcing his mind to cling to thoughts of home, of warm kitchens and sunlight. But each time his eyes closed, he saw it, the serpent's face rising from the abyss, those pale human-like eyes staring straight into him, as though marking him. At last, a low hum broke the silence. Engines. The survivors stirred, heads lifting weakly. A ship. Salvation. Out of the fog emerged a massive destroyer, her flag unmistakable. A Navy rescue vessel. Hands reached down, hauling them aboard, wrapping blankets around their shivering forms. McCarthy collapsed to the deck, sobbing with relief. He was alive. Against every nightmare, against every curse, he was alive. But the relief was short-lived. Back in the infirmary, as medics checked his wounds, McCarthy overheard the officers whispering. There had been no distress call from the Valiant, no signals, no reports. The destroyer had been dispatched for routine patrol, not rescue. Officially, the Valiant had vanished without explanation. And what of the Serpent? What of the shadowed brood beneath the waves? Nothing was to be spoken of. Nothing was to be written. The survivors were sworn to silence. National security, the officer said coldly. eyes hard. This incident never happened. The Valiant never existed. Do you understand? McCarthy nodded numbly, though rage burned in his chest. Men had given their lives. The captain had sacrificed everything. And now the truth would rot at the bottom of the ocean, hidden by men in uniforms who feared what the world might say. That night, McCarthy lay in the infirmary bunk, unable to sleep. He stared at the ceiling, hearing the creak of the ship, the crash of waves. But beneath it all, there was another sound, a low, rolling thunder deep below. The same sound he had heard before the first Serpent rose. It followed him home. Even months later, discharged and back on American soil, McCarthy could not escape it. The sound would rumble in his dreams, pulling him back into the fog, back into the wreckage, back into the gaze of those pale eyes. Sometimes, when he walked along the coast, he thought he saw something vast far out at sea, a ridge breaking the surface for only a second before sinking again. Fishermen whispered of strange disappearances, of ships swallowed whole, of waters that boiled without reason. McCarthy never doubted them, because he knew the truth. The Serpent had not died. The brood had not been destroyed. The ocean belonged to them, and they were waiting for the next ship to cross their path, waiting for the next sacrifice. And somewhere, in the deepest black of the ocean, those pale eyes still stared, never blinking, never forgetting,